Hola, amigos. Hello, everybody. Amigos y amigas. This is the Michael Bunker Radio Podcast thingy. I think this is number 4. El número cuatro. And glad to be here today. Glad you're listening. And been raining here nonstop. Not nonstop. We say that. It's never true. Even the flood, it stopped. But it has been raining on and off for since this weekend. So we've got a lot of mud. We have the worst mud. We have the clay mud that it's great in some things, but it sticks to everything, and it very quickly becomes undrivable. So Danielle had taken the truck up to the front of the land this morning, and then she had to go into town this morning to take Jennifer to the horse farm, and so she was able to get out. But if had the truck been either down here at the office or at the cottage, she almost certainly would not have gotten out today. And that's one of the things about living off grid. You have to understand, and other people have to understand that you may or may not make it. Pardon me. Allergies have been bad, but they're getting a little better. The last 2 days haven't been too bad. This has been the worst year, I think, for my cedar allergies. But with the rains, it's starting to clear. The problem is that the pollen is everywhere. It is actually absolutely everywhere. It's coating everything, and so even if there's not pollen in the air, I come in the office. There's pollen on dust on top of everything. So I still get it. So I'm still doing the things I should be doing, hopefully, to try to mitigate it. All right, so this is the Michael Bunker Radio Podcast thingy, and I did ask for questions or topics for today's radio podcast thingy. Rejected questions. John Brenner asked if I wanted to talk about the inaugural attendees and performers. Not in the least would I want to do that. I had a list. I don't know what I did with it. I had a list for some questions and things that people had sent in either via email or private message. And my wife, my wonderful wife, and I'm glad she did it, cleaned my desk off while I was in Waco. I went to Waco. I don't know if I told you that. Went to Waco, got back yesterday, and went to Homestead Heritage, which is I don't know what you would call it. It's a community of believers who live down in Waco. There's a ton of them, 800 or so, and they have they display their skills, their homesteading skills. And so they have a dairy. And you can go down there and tour it. And they have a grain mill, woodworking classes. Timber framing classes. They have classes on making cheese, beekeeping, gardening, you name it. And they're a very valuable resource. But I met them quite a long time ago when I was taking woodworking with hand tools classes, and so they're really nice to me every time I go down there. And so I called them and told them I was coming and bringing a few people, and asked them if we could come look at their grist mill, because we had kind of the remnants of a grist mill, the stones and the metal mechanical parts of a grist mill that was given to us by a friend of mine, and the rest of it had rotted away, and so we want to rebuild it. And so we found some instructions and plans online, and but we wanted to go look and see theirs actually working, so we could see how all the mechanics work. Take some pictures and whatnot. So very graciously, they opened the place up for us and let us go in there and let us actually get back there with the machines, which are usually roped off, and take pictures and watch the grist mill work. And it was a kind of a long trip, because I drove from here to Waco, here to Desdemona, which is where my friend lives, and picked him up, and then we drove to Waco, which is where the friend who gave us the mill was, and had lunch, and then we drove to Waco picked up a friend, and then drove up to Homestead Heritage. Drove back that night, stayed in Desdemona, and then got back here yesterday. So I don't even know how I got into all that, but that's what happened. And then I'm planning on going to Austin this weekend for several days. And Austin Saturday, I'll be down there Saturday. Sunday, there's 2 events on. We'll be at Malvern Books at 1 o'clock, from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock. Malvern Books in Austin, Texas. Come on out, please. 1 o'clock, and I'm going to be there with Forbes West, and we're going to be kind of launching Time Looter and doing a reading and some signing. And then after that, we're driving over to Half Price Books, the one on Lamar, North Lamar, I think it is, and we are going to be doing a sci-fi panel. So there'll be a lot of authors there to meet, and several of us will be on a panel answering questions and talking about science fiction. All right, so that's what I'll be doing this weekend. So getting back to the questions, Sarah asked a favorite example of government and or societal cooperation. And it's interesting because I got 2 questions right next to each other, and one of them is on favorite example of government or societal cooperation, and the next one from John Frater, Anarchy in the United States. All right, so I guess I could probably kind of blend these together. Most of you know that I am a theoretical anarchist. And I say theoretical because I'm not an activist or anything like that, and I don't expect that there will be any time when true anarchy. And I know people automatically get in this thought of like riots. When you say anarchy, it's like anarchy, everybody running crazy, everybody doing whatever they want to do, and that's not really anarchy. Anarchy just means that there's no central or governing body telling people what they ought to do, and so I believe it's theoretical because of the culture and society we live in today. More specifically, I'm a monarchist, but knowing that monarchy is very likely not coming back until the Lord returns, then I'm stuck being an anarchist because I'm not willing to accept any of the other systems. And so not that I don't accept them like I'm rebelling against them. I mean, I don't accept them as legitimate or best systems. Anyways, so Sarah's question about best example of government and or societal cooperation. I think I would go back to probably the Waldensians. And don't run over to Google or to Wikipedia and look up the Waldensians. You can do that, but their article on Waldensians is horrible, very inaccurate. I've got a bunch of books here going back a lot of years, history books, and that article in Wikipedia is horrible. And there's a reason you can't even really get in and change it, and that's because there are people today who call themselves Waldensians as being descended from the Waldenses, and yet their doctrine is different than their view of history has been skewed. And so and that happens. I talked about it the other day with the Southern Baptists, and it happened with the Waldensians. But the Waldensians were a group who early in the first couple of centuries, maybe by the 3rd century, had fled Rome and had gone into the Alps, and they were a Christian group who had, we believe, had studied under the apostles, were directly descended by teachers directly from the apostles, and had probably the most purest doctrine from the 1st and 2nd century. And they fled into the Alps of France, Italy, and Switzerland, and there became a community called the Valley people, or Valenses. And there, in my book, The Last Pilgrims, is a modernized version of that story. There's a book called Rora, a fiction book. You could get that. That's really good. Order that, Rora, Rora. anyways, the Waldenses were a society that really didn't have a formal government, and they were loose connection society of communities of people who had the same belief system and shared preachers who traveled, called barbs, and they fought against being wiped out, genocided for 1,000 years. Were nearly wiped out in the 12th and 13th century by the Roman Catholic Church, but were able to organize and defend their valleys. They were run out for a while and went into Switzerland, and then went back and ended up taking their valleys back. And so they were basically, and the Reformation started with the Waldenses. The doctrines of the Reformation came from the Waldenses. And so I think that's probably my favorite example of societal cooperation in the way that they worked together without a king or anything like that, in the way that they organized themselves for the defense of their valleys. So then I go into that to John Frater's question on anarchy in the USA. I don't think it's likely. I think that the modern sense of the term anarchy is very likely for a period of time, which just means ineffective government control over anything and widespread lawlessness. But that's not what we mean when we mean anarchy. What we mean basically is that individuals and the society govern themselves according to a moral law, and they don't have the need of oppressive or omnipresent type of government systems. And so Tolstoy was had a form of anarchy in his belief system, and believed that government was power, and that power corrupts, and it was a dangerous power. And then John here in this thread mentions Kropotkin, I think, and Kropotkin was more like a socialist or communist type of anarchist, in that he didn't believe in like a communist form of government as you identify it, but that societies naturally would evolve to a system of mutual care and working together, and that would be like the natural, if they weren't interfered with by corrupt power and authorities, then that's how they would naturally form themselves. So I don't think anarchy is likely in the U.S. It would be nice if we were intelligent enough as a people to realize that the forms of government we've adopted are by nature corrupting, that they increase in both tyranny and capricious power, and to get to funnel both money and power to an elite or an oligarchy, and those things ought to be completely rejected. That's the natural tendency of anything that even is slightly democratic, is that you're going to end up with people forming power blocks, gathering power to themselves, stifling competition. You end up with a corruption between the economic powers and the political powers, who then join together, and it's just a natural tendency of those types of systems. One of the reasons that the system in America lasted somewhat purely for as long as it did was that the Constitution severely limited government, but that's gone now, and so we're full speed ahead on the path, the trajectory that democracy always takes. And so who knows? We operate in our community here, our Christian community in Central Texas. We operate under elder rule, which is not really a system of government. It's just a way and means of managing competing interests. And so we have the closest and most important government in our community is the family. That's the first and foremost and inviolate. And then the next government above that is our elders, who operate to just to maintain community standards and to deal with situations between members that are not directly family government. And then over that, or aside that, pardon me, is we recognize the civil magistrates. And so it's closer to the system of anarchy as I see it that would be beneficial, which is that you have individuals, so long as individuals are managing their business and taking care of their business and minding their business and not doing harm, then they should be left to do and be free to do those things without being imposed upon by magistrates. Anyways, so there's that, and I know everybody disagrees with me, so there's no sense really in even telling me, because I already know that you disagree with me. A lot of governmental questions here. Colby Zellers asked, your 2020 presidential campaign, Bunker, he's plain honest. I'm just not ready to announce my candidacy, mainly because I want to make sure that I have enough things taken care of, because one of my first acts when I'm elected president is going to have have myself investigated for corruption, because I don't think it's possible for you to win the presidency without being corrupt. I don't think it's possible at all to ascend into any level of political power in America without being corrupt. And so for me to win, I would have to be corrupt, and then therefore, as a moral man, I would want to have myself investigated for corruption. And so I want to have all those ducks in a row before I announce my candidacy, so that I can immediately be arrested for corruption as soon as I'm elected. All right. Wolf asks, how do you balance the responsibilities, which I'm sure there are many, of living off-grid with having to keep to a writing routine? I do it poorly, and that is my answer on that. I don't do it very well. And so because of that, a lot of the off-grid responsibilities either get put off or they get taken care of by my family. And that's not the way it should be, and I'm trying to do better, but for the most part, I'm just not very good at it, and I try to be better at it, but the farm is really run by my family. I do big things when they need to be done, and my wife will tell me to come hook up the trailer or move the trailer, or we need to something we need to do, and then I'll go do that. But most of the time, that's being taken care of by the family, and I'm going to try to do better at that. That's one of the things I really want to do this year, is spend more time working with the family and trying to do better handling my responsibilities. All right. Sarah asked, what is the most time-consuming aspect of being off-grid? Oh, that's a difficult question, because it's different at different times of the year. For a long time, the most difficult and the most time-consuming aspect of being off-grid was handling and capturing, handling, moving, and purifying water, which is a huge responsibility when you live off-grid. And when you start off, a lot of times you don't have a lot of money. You don't have an instant system of this, and so you're trying to catch water in barrels or in cattle tanks or in small tanks, and there's a lot of moving water, hauling water in buckets. There's a lot of trying to capture rainwater and put it where you need it, and there's a lot of purifying of water. And so then as time goes by, hopefully you're working to improve and we still are working on a overall water development system here on the land that we hope is going to solve these problems for the next generation. But it still is an issue, and it still takes a lot of time. We have water catchment tanks now that catch water off the buildings. We catch water from our cottage, and that goes into a in-ground cistern. And then I had a pump in that cistern, but that pump broke, and so I need to either build or procure a new pump. And then we're putting together a water tower And we would pump water up to the water tower, then it would flow down into the garden area. We just came back. I mentioned I just came back from Homestead Heritage. They have some neat systems there that are, of course, they're on grid, but ways of capturing and moving water that they use for their water wheel for the grist mill. But I think that's one of the really big time-consuming things. Laundry, of course, I don't do the laundry, but I know that it is time-consuming for my wife and my girls, and the rest of it is really either seasonal or I'm sure my wife would say meal production, because we don't have refrigeration and we don't have microwaves. Instant food preparation, we don't do a lot of snacking because we don't keep food around that much. That is just like instantly ready to eat. And there's a lot of good things behind that, and good results of that. But so food production is one. We do have food in the root cellar that is fairly quick to heat up and produce meals, but I'm sure that's pretty time consuming as well. Wolf, he has a couple more questions here. He said, here's a big one, and you probably covered it a while ago, but what prompted you to take the big leap, to make that great decision to turn your back on the hustle and bustle of modern life and return to a more plain life? We had started already doing a small farm in West Texas in 1997, and had developed that farm out there. It was 5 acres, but we were doing a lot of small acreage things, and we were producing a lot of our own food. We had a pretty intensive gardening system. We had chickens. We had 200 to 300 chickens. We were producing and selling goats. We had a cow and a few other things, and we had a pretty good system going. We were on grid. We had a water well, so we weren't on solar, and we weren't off grid. And we wanted to move in that direction, and we had the desire, but it was kind of a slow process. We were eventually hoping to have the power pole removed and all of that, and we would have liked more acreage. One day, my father, who lived about 50 yards from us, his property was adjacent to mine, and pardon me, he came over one day. This would have been in 2004, probably late 2004, maybe early 2005, and he said, we're getting older. Speaking of him and my mother, we don't want to live out here much longer. We would like to move into town, and we think it would be better for us in our older age to not be out here in the country. And so we just wanted to let you know, because you need to know that we may not be living here. Well, that meant that there would be a stranger living 50 yards from my house, and that property actually wrapped around my property, so I would be surrounded really on every side by strangers who, and the idea of community was already big with us. And so during that time, we had already talked to some really good friends who live in the community here now, Mr. and Mrs. Sifford. They weren't married at the time, but they were getting married, and they wanted to do what we were doing, and we all wanted to kind of go off grid and to live more plain type of lifestyle. And so we started looking for land out in West Texas first, and talking to other people about perhaps starting a community of people that would buy land near each other. And we just weren't able to find the right place. We weren't able to find enough acres, or it was way too expensive, or the people just didn't want to sell. And so finally, at one point, we kind of hit the wall, and I said, well, we need to stop thinking that automatically we're supposed to be in West Texas. Maybe we need to stretch out our view a little bit and find some of the other things we might be lacking. Like in West Texas, there's no groundwater. There's almost no trees. So natural resources are very limited out there. And so we started making a list of things that we would like to have, and the amount of money we wanted to spend per acre, the amount of acres we were looking for. So we had this list, and it had to do with county size, population, crime rates, things like government regulation, county regulations, whether we would be able to build whatever we want to build, however we want to build it, without somebody coming and telling us we couldn't do it. And so we made this list, and then we started looking around, and we kind of put a pin in the map around Brownwood, Texas, because 70 miles east of Brownwood, they get a plentiful rain. It's very nice soil, and the prices of land go way, way up. And then, 70 miles west of Brownwood, you're getting into desert, semi-arid desert, very little rain. We get about 26 to 28 inches of rain here a year. They get about 13 or less, so less than half the rain, just 70 miles west. Just to the east, they may get 35 inches of rain, and but because of that, the property values were so high. So we kind of centered around Brownwood. We didn't want to be in Brown County because it's a highly populated county, and we didn't want that mess. And so we kind of started looking around, and then we found this place, which is about 24 miles west-northwest of Brownwood, Texas. And that's kind of how we made the decision. And then we got together with the Siffords and some other people and came out and looked at the land, decided this is what we were going to do, how we were going to separate the land up, how we were going to pay for it, and all that. All right, Wolf says, last question from me. Do you think it will be possible to continue living a plain existence in 20 or 30 years, or do you think government's reach and restrictions and possibly other reasons might limit that freedom eventually? It's a hard question because there's kind of mixed motives and mixed history. For the most part, government has been willing to leave plain people alone. And there's a lot of law that's been established in Supreme Court cases that protect plain people. That's becoming harder to be included in. In other words, they tend to now write these laws that exempt the Amish or these communities if they've been around for 50. At the same time, there is certainly a move in government to be involved in restricting or directing every single thing we do. Some states you can't catch water off your roof. Some states you may not have solar panels. You're not allowed to be off the grid, like Florida. And those restrictions are increasing because of the things I talked about earlier. When you live in a democracy, the more that democracy is freed from restrictions on what government can do. When the restrictions on government are removed, the people are easily manipulated into voting for things that don't affect them, but that they think are going to benefit them in some other way. So busybodies are always going to have enough money from people like Soros or people on the right wing that have a lot of money to buy ads and manipulate emotions and get people to vote for restrictions on things, anything and everything. And so, some of them are so ridiculous. I mean, how many beehives you can have, restrictions on everything from growing tobacco, growing marijuana, growing, how much, some products, cotton, etc., and peanuts have statewide restrictions on where you can grow them and how much you can grow. But there's always going to be that, and that's going to be increasing. And so the hope is that and the laws that have been put in place and the court cases that protect the plain people from a lot of these onerous restrictions and imposition on their worldview and culture have benefited greatly the society, as the Supreme Court ruled, even if it's just as a seedbed of skills that the society is increasingly losing in a very rapid fashion. For example, I just mentioned going down to Homestead Heritage and learning how to beekeep, learning how to grow things, learning hydroponics. You can learn woodworking with hand tools. These are skills that have been lost by the mainstream society, and to have communities that maintain these skills and allow those communities to be exempted from these onerous restrictions is valuable to the whole culture, the whole society. And so there's that motivation, you hope, but it's hard to tell, and it's hard to tell whether they're finally going to say, oh, okay, the only way you can do that is you have to become Amish, and that is a contradiction with the term Amish, because the Amish are not a monolithic people. They don't have a central identification system, and so what will happen is you will have people, communities like ours, that eventually will call themselves Amish just to be grandfathered into those laws that protect them if we don't write the laws better, so that anybody who is living according to these certain distinctives are exempted from those onerous restrictions. All right, Scott Robert Glazier, baseball, Hall of Fame, PEDs, and Pete Rose. Don't care about any of it because the Hall of Fame is immaterial until Pete Rose is in it. And until that happens, the Hall of Fame might as well not exist. It just doesn't matter because even the words don't mean anything if the best hitter in baseball history is not in there. All right. T. Jazzy Davies said, what would you tell your 20-year-old self if you could go back? What do you see as your successes and regrets and mistakes? The main thing I would tell 20-year-old me was starting to figure out, but had just kind of begun to figure it out, and that is, and pay very close attention. This is what I would tell me. No mainstream system is, in the long run, good or beneficial. And that it covers everything from religion, society, culture, economics, worldview, anything. So I would tell myself to be skeptical and to avoid any system that has become popularized, because by definition that system has either been dumbed down or corrupted to apply or to be attractive to the largest number of people. So at age 20, I already knew that college, although I went back, I knew, although I didn't act on it perfectly, I knew that college was ridiculous and a complete and utter lack of and waste of time and money. Unless you are in a highly skilled position, such as a doctor, or you're building highways, or you're flying planes, or something like that, the whole concept, the corrupt concept that higher education somehow is anything other than a systemic guild con to force people to pay huge amounts of money to receive papers that say something that in most cases is not true. So I would avoid college at all costs. I would tell myself, and I would actually go before 20. I would go back to 15, 16, 17, and hopefully tell myself not to ever succumb to systems of any kind, really, especially the education system. And so the next thing I would tell myself is that, and I have to tell you that I've been greatly blessed with one wife, and married, almost be 25 years next month, and I love her, and I would absolutely marry her over again, and I choose her every day. At the same time, I would tell myself that, because at that time I would know all that the most important decision that young me will ever make, ever, is which wife is to take a wife. To take a wife, or which one you take. There's no area in which almost everyone I know has failed in life. Very few exceptions than that. And I would probably educate me on what to look for. And the next thing I would probably tell myself is that I would tell myself that the concept or the system, which I told you I would avoid, of seeking money as an end or as the means to whatever I want is a horrible worldview. In other words, I think we can seek what we want, whether that's education or whether that's artistry, art, happiness, joy, relationships, without using money as the middleman. So, in other words, we're taught that you go out and you pay for this education that means nothing, but they give you a piece of paper that lets you get a job, which means you get to make money to buy the things you want, except that you have to spend all of your time, 40 to 80 hours a week, away from the things you want to be doing and the things you should be doing in order to have the money to buy the things that you end up not being able to really use. I would tell myself to avoid that system, which I did. My successes are that I've done the things that I just mentioned. I've gotten away from those systems and successfully taught my family. The biggest mistakes and regrets is that I spent, when my children were younger, up until just recently, I spent way too much time trying to help a lot of people rather than helping my family. In other words, I neglected my family on behalf of a lot of other people who turned out not to be worth it. And so I think I would spend probably some of my time writing, some of my time teaching, but it would be a smaller portion, and I would spend a lot more time working with my family, achieving infrastructure out here on the farm when my children were younger, and had spent more time with them, and that would have helped everything. Richard King says, how long does an outhouse last in one spot before you have to move it? Well, my buddy Richard, as usual, he and I both failed math. There are too many unknowns in your question. So here's the elements of the question. I know that there's an outhouse in the problem, but you're asking me how long, and I don't know how many people. How deep did you dig the hole? How wide is the hole? How often do people use the restroom? How many people are going to be using it? Are you doing number 1 and number 2 in there? Are you dumping other things in there? Are you, all of these things? There's all these unknowns. And so there's absolutely no way for me to know based on what you're saying. However, if I was to say in my family, which most of the time we've been here, we've had 6, it was usually a couple of years, and then we would have to move it based on how, we would dig a hole 8 to 10 feet deep, 2 to 3 feet, maybe 3 feet across or square, and you get cave-ins, and it's not a perfect system, but but my point is that we're getting away from using outhouse. I'll probably dig one more outhouse hole in my life, Lord willing, and after that we won't use outhouses anymore. We're going more to humanure, which I talked about on, I think, show number 2, podcast number 2. All right. I haven't even looked to see time. We're probably running to the end. And so I want to tell everybody that if you have questions or topics you would like me to talk about, questions about things I've talked about, you can always ask questions on the comments on YouTube. I do approve the comments before they go up. So if you don't see your question immediately, either I have deleted it or I have not approved it yet. The second thing you can do, and I may answer your question in a later show. You can also get to me on Facebook. Facebook.com/offgrid is me. You could also find me on Twitter at mbunker. My website is michaelbunker.com. Get on my newsletter there, and if you're on my newsletter, you get free stuff all the time. And I think I talked about Patreon in the last show, but if you want to support all of the stuff that I'm doing, then go to my website, michaelbunker.com, and click on the Patreon symbol, and you can become a patron for as little as $1, and you get free stuff like everybody that's a patron is going to get my book Time Looter today. So, okay, everybody, glad to be here. Ask me more questions, send me more topics. Glad you're listening. Make sure that you subscribe to this YouTube channel so you'll get more of the shows in the future. And I will talk to you soon.